You're sitting in your house. It's a beautiful place. You own it. No landlord, no rental agreement, no one can kick you out. And it's stressed you to the point of exhaustion. The roof is leaking. The furnace is making a sound you don't recognize. The plumbing is from 1985. The kitchen hasn't been updated since before you were born. And you're looking at estimates for repairs. $15,000 for the roof, $8,000 for a new furnace, $5,000 to update the plumbing, $30,000, $40,000, maybe more if you really want to address everything. And you don't have that money, not even close. So you let it sit. You put buckets under the leak. You turn the heat up higher to compensate for the furnace's inefficiency. You deal with the plumbing the way it is because, well, at least it's your own house. At least you're not throwing money away on rent. At least you're building equity. And I spend way too much time thinking about home ownership and the psychology around it, how people rationalize staying in situations that are costing them enormous amounts of money, how ownership creates this weird blindness to financial reality, and why so many people think that owning a house is automatically better than renting, no matter what the actual numbers say. Because here's the thing that nobody wants to admit. That phrase, "at least it's my own house," is actually one of the most dangerous financial thoughts you can have. It's a justification for poor decision-making. It's a way of avoiding the real conversation about whether home ownership is actually serving you or just slowly bleeding you dry. And once you see how that thought works, you can't unsee it. Let me start with something that sounds crazy, but I think it's true. The idea that you own your house is actually kind of an illusion. Yes, you have the deed, your name is on the paperwork, but do you actually own it? Let's think about this practically. You still have a mortgage, most people do, so for the next 15 to 30 years, you're making payments to the bank. You don't own it free and clear. The bank owns it. You own the right to pay for it. And then there are property taxes. Every single year, the government taxes you on the value of your house. If you don't pay, they can take it from you. So you don't really own it in the sense that you can just have it and never pay anything. You're renting it from the government via property taxes. And then there's maintenance. If you don't maintain it, it deteriorates. And if you try to sell it unmaintained, nobody will buy it, or they'll pay way less. So you're forced to spend money on it constantly, or the value declines. And insurance. You have to have insurance. That's another ongoing payment. So when you add up the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, the maintenance, the repairs, the utilities, the HOA fees, if you have those, you're not actually owning the house. You're just renting it from a system of financial obligations. The difference is the illusion of ownership. You feel like you own it, and that feeling is powerful. But the financial reality is that you're locked into ongoing expenses that rival or exceed what you'd pay for rent. Here's where this gets dangerous. Once you've bought a house, once you've made that commitment, something happens psychologically. You start justifying the purchase to yourself, no matter what the financial reality actually is. You've spent money on the down payment, you've spent money on closing costs, you're making mortgage payments, and so you think, I can't sell, I've already spent too much money. That's called sunk cost fallacy. You're making future decisions based on money you've already spent and can't get back. So even if the house is costing you more than renting would, even if the maintenance is eating into your savings, even if you'd be better off financially renting somewhere cheaper, you stay, because you've already spent so much money that selling feels like admitting defeat. And that's when you start saying things like, "At least it's my own house." It's a way of reframing a bad financial decision as a good life decision. You can't afford to maintain it, but at least you own it. You're stressed about money because of the house, but at least it's your house. But that justification is stopping you from making rational financial choices. It's locking you into a situation that's actively making your life worse, financially and emotionally. I knew someone who was living in a house they'd bought at the peak of the market. The mortgage was massive, the house had a ton of problems, and they were stressed about money constantly. But they wouldn't move, they wouldn't downsize, they wouldn't rent, because they kept saying, "I own my house, I'm not going to rent again." But the house was destroying them financially. They had no savings. They couldn't afford emergencies. They were one car repair away from financial crisis. And it was all because of the sunk cost fallacy and the need to justify the original decision to buy. Here's something that real estate agents don't really highlight when they're trying to sell you on homeownership. It's expensive in ways that go way beyond the mortgage. Let me break down the actual costs. You have your mortgage payment. Let's say it's $2,000 a month. That seems reasonable for owning a home, right? But then you have property taxes. Depending on where you live, that could be $200, $300, $400 a month. So now it's $2,400 to $2,400. Then insurance, maybe $200 a month, $2,600 total. Then utilities, more than an apartment because it's bigger, maybe $200, $2,800. Then maintenance, and this is the big one that people underestimate. Experts say you should budget 1% of the home's value per year for maintenance and repairs. If your house costs $400,000, that's $4,000 a year. That's $330 a month. So now we're at $3,130 a month. That's $37,000 a year. But wait, most people don't do 1% maintenance regularly. They let things go, and then something breaks. The roof fails, the furnace dies, the plumbing backs up, and suddenly you're looking at a $30,000 repair. So some years it's $300 a month. Other years it's a 5-figure emergency. On average, it works out to somewhere north of what you budgeted. Now compare that to renting. If you're renting, you're paying rent. That's it. No surprise roof repairs, no emergency furnace replacement. The landlord handles it. So if you're paying $2,500 in rent and you're paying $37,000 a year in housing costs as a homeowner, the homeowner is paying $12,000 more per year. That's $144,000 over 12 years. And that's before you account for the fact that you're also building no wealth with those maintenance and tax and insurance payments. They're gone. The only thing that's building wealth is the mortgage principal, which is maybe $400 a month in the first few years. So you're spending massive amounts of money, and most of it isn't even going toward ownership. It's going toward the privilege of owning. There's another cost to homeownership that nobody really talks about, and it's the cost of inflexibility. When you own a house, you're locked in. If your job changes, if you need to move, if circumstances change, you can't just leave. You have to sell. And selling a house takes time. It costs money in real estate agent fees, closing costs, repairs to make it marketable. It's a major undertaking. So when you own a house, you lose flexibility. You're locked into a location for years. You can't pivot quickly if something changes. Meanwhile, someone who's renting, they can leave. If they find a better job in another city, they give notice and they go. If they want to try living in a different neighborhood, they can switch when the lease is up. They have options. And options are worth money. Options are worth freedom. But when you're locked into homeownership, you lose that. I knew someone who got offered an amazing job in another state, better salary, better opportunity, the kind of thing that could have changed their career trajectory. But they owned a house. They couldn't sell quickly without taking a loss in a declining market. So they turned down the job, and they spent the next few years wondering what could have been, all because they were locked into homeownership. The flexibility cost is real, and it's not something that shows up on a spreadsheet, but it's definitely part of the total cost of homeownership. Okay, so I've been pretty negative about homeownership, but I want to be clear. Home ownership can make sense. It's just not automatic. It's not always the right choice. Home ownership makes sense when a few things are true. First, you're planning to stay for a long time, long enough that the transaction costs of buying and selling are spread out over enough years that they make sense. Generally, that's 5 to 7 years minimum, but ideally longer. Second, home ownership makes sense when you have a solid financial foundation. You have an emergency fund. You have savings. You're not stretched thin with other debt. Because home ownership requires financial flexibility for emergencies. Third, Home ownership makes sense when the numbers actually work, when the cost of owning is less than the cost of renting in your area, not just the mortgage, but the total cost. And in a lot of expensive real estate markets, renting is cheaper. Fourth, home ownership makes sense when you're doing it for the right reasons, not because you feel like you should, not because society tells you you should, not because you're trying to build equity as some abstract concept, but because you actually want to stay in one place and you want to control your living situation. If those things are true, then home ownership can be great. But if they're not, if you're buying a house just because you feel like you should own something, if you're stretching yourself thin, if the numbers don't work, if you're not planning to stay, then home ownership is a trap, and the "at least it's my own house" mentality is what keeps you in it. Here's what really bothers me about the "at least it's my own house" mentality. It's a justification for poor financial decision-making. It's a way of avoiding the hard conversation about whether this was actually a good choice. And justifications are dangerous because they stop you from fixing the problem. If you think the problem is solved, if you think you're in a good situation just because you own the house, then you're not going to take action to improve it. But the financial stress is real. The costs are real. The opportunity costs are real. And if you're only justifying it instead of addressing it, you're just going to stay stuck. And this applies to everything, not just houses. We justify all sorts of bad financial decisions to ourselves. At least I have a car. At least I have nice things. At least I'm trying. These justifications feel good in the moment. They make us feel like we're doing the right thing, but they're actually preventing us from making better choices. The honest conversation is harder. It's scarier. It means admitting that maybe you made a mistake. Maybe you're not in as good a situation as you thought. Maybe you need to make a change. But that's where growth happens. That's where you actually improve your financial situation. Okay, so maybe you're listening to this and you're realizing that you're in a house that's costing you way more than it should. You're stretched thin. You're stressed. The "at least it's my own house" thought isn't really making you happy anymore. What do you actually do? First, run the numbers. Actually calculate what it's costing you to own the house. The mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance, everything. Compare it to what you'd pay to rent something similar. If renting is cheaper, seriously consider selling. I know that sounds drastic. I know there's emotional attachment to the house, but if it's costing you thousands more per year than renting, and you're not planning to stay long term, it's actively hurting you. Second, if you're committed to staying, but the house needs major repairs, prioritize strategically. Not everything is equal. A roof or plumbing is critical. A kitchen renovation is not. Focus on the stuff that prevents the house from deteriorating further. Third, if you're going to own a home, own one you can actually afford comfortably, not stretched thin, not worried about paying for repairs, comfortable. Because that's when home ownership actually adds value to your life instead of just stress. Fourth, challenge the justifications. When you catch yourself saying, "at least it's my own house," pause. Ask yourself, is this actually serving me? Am I happy? Am I financially stable? Or am I just justifying a decision I'm not sure about? And fifth, remember that home ownership isn't the only path to financial security. Renting is fine. It's flexible. It's often cheaper. And it's not a failure. It's just a different choice. What we're really talking about here is the difference between what we think we should want and what actually makes our lives better. Our culture tells us that owning a home is a marker of success. It's part of the American dream. You're supposed to want to own a house, and if you don't, there's something wrong with you. But that cultural narrative isn't actually built around your financial well-being. It's built around the financial interests of lenders, real estate agents, construction companies, and everyone else who profits from you buying a house. So when you're thinking about whether to buy a house or whether to stay in a house that's not working for you, you need to tune out that cultural narrative. You need to look at your actual situation, your actual numbers, your actual goals. And you need to be honest about whether this is actually serving you. Because if it's not, then all the justifications in the world won't change that. The house is just a building. It's not an identity. It's not success. It's not a marker of having made it. It's just a place to live. And if it's not making your life better, then it's time to reconsider. So here's what I want you to take from this. The phrase, "at least it's my own house," is often a sign that you've made a decision that's not serving you, and you're justifying it instead of addressing it. Home ownership can be great, it can be worth it, but it's not automatically good just because you own it. And it's definitely not good if it's costing you thousands more than renting, if it's preventing you from taking opportunities, if it's causing you stress and financial insecurity. The hard conversation is this house actually worth what I'm paying for it? Not just the mortgage, but everything. And am I keeping this house because it makes my life better, or because I'm too emotionally attached to admit I made a mistake? If it's the former, great, enjoy your home. If it's the latter, you need to seriously consider making a change. Because your financial security matters more than your pride. Your peace of mind matters more than owning something, and your freedom matters more than the illusion of ownership. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "at least it's my own house," I want you to pause. Ask yourself if you're justifying or if you're actually happy, because there's a big difference. And if you're not actually happy, if the numbers don't work, if you're stretched thin, then you have permission to make a different choice. You can rent, you can downsize, you can move. You can make the decision that's actually best for you, not the decision that fits the cultural narrative. Thank you for thinking through this with me. If this resonated, please share it with someone who's struggling with home ownership. And let me know in the comments, are you using the "at least it's my own house" justification? What would change if you really ran the numbers? Thanks for watching.